Hello everybody, my name is Joshua Winkins and welcome back to another video. Now this video is geared more towards the camera basics, camera 101, photography, videography 101, anything like that. So I thought some kind of transitioning more into like photography, videography, filmmaking, tutorials. I wanted to go ahead and start off the video with camera basics. Now what I mean by camera basics I mean like shutter speed, ISO, aperture, lens, the very basics you need to know in order to get better at photography, get better at filmmaking. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the first topic, which is ISO. Okay guys, so let's hop on to topic number one, which is ISO. A general, simplistic definition of ISO is making your image darker or brighter. That's a very simplistic version of ISO. Now in terms of the numbers, you have ISO 200, people say, shoot at ISO 1000. What do those numbers mean? The lower the number, the darker the image is going to be. So for instance, I shoot like ISO 200 or 400 because right here I have a ring light that's on me, so that's where the light's coming from, and I have the sunlight over here which changes, so the lighting might change a little bit, it might get darker or brighter. I can't control that, but I do have a shades on, a sunlight coming through me, so I have some light on me, so therefore I'm going to want my ISO to be pretty low because I already have some kind of light on me, so I don't want to make my camera really bright. So, if you turn your ISO to like 800, it makes your image really bright. So the gist of it is, when you're shooting outside with the sunlight, or you're shooting with a ring light or some artificial light on you, you're going to want your ISO to be pretty low because you already have some sort of artificial light or you have natural light. So you want your image to be a low ISO, you want your image to be dark. If you have a high ISO with light coming on you, your image is going to be blown out, it's going to be incredibly overexposed. So the gist of this whole thing is basically, if you have light on you, or it's a bright environment, you're going to want a low ISO. ISO 200 to 600 is usually a general good ISO for that situation. If you're shooting outside, if you're shooting in a really dark environment, like let's say you're shooting indoors, if I turned off all my lights, I want my ISO to be, I don't know, 800 or 1000. The higher the ISO is, the brighter the image is. The lower the ISO, the darker the image is. So that's kind of a very simplistic version of ISO. Now let's go ahead and head over to the second topic, which is aperture. Okay guys, so topic number two is aperture. Now you see on some cameras you have like f1, f3, f35. What do those numbers mean? And that f number is the aperture. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of explain what that means in the most simplistic way possible. Try not to rant. So aperture is the same kind of thing with light and dark. But it's a lot more complex than that. So let's say, for example, in terms of the first topic, ISO. Let's say you're shooting in like a really dark environment, you're going to want your ISO to be really low, like f2 something. It lets more light into the lens and it makes your image brighter. The higher the aperture is, then it's going to make your image darker. Now, people don't use aperture just to make your image brighter or darker. That's more of what ISO is for, and what your artificial ring lights are. Aperture is for portraits. Now I'm going to go ahead and flash a whole bunch of pictures on screen, but aperture is how you see photos, put a whole bunch of pictures on screen, photos where the background is blurred and it's only focused on one subject. That's aperture. So think about it. I'm not the best at explaining things, but think about it this way. So if you want a lot more light in. So let's say you don't want the image or the image to be blurred out. You're going to want a high aperture. So aperture f3 or f5, the background is not going to be blurred out. But if you want the background to be blurred out, you're going to want a low aperture. This video is being shot at aperture 1.7. My lens can go to 1.7. Usually 1.7 or f2 is usually a pretty good aperture to have to blur out the background. Because like I said, the lower the aperture is, the more light it lets in. So if you want the background to be blurred, you shoot a lower aperture. If you don't want the background to be blurred, you shoot a higher aperture, and that's a lot more what aperture is for, and that's how people get those blurred out backgrounds. And my background's probably a little blurred out because I'm shooting at a low aperture. So let's go ahead and hop on to the third topic, which is shutter speed. Okay guys, the third topic is shutter speed. Now I'm going to go ahead and explain it very simplicity, I can't say it, but it's basically how you shoot moving images that look really still. If you see sports and whatever, and you see like the person running and the picture's like incredibly crisp, no motion blur at all, not motion blur, but no blur at all, that's because that thing was shot at an incredibly high shutter speed. Now, one thing doing explaining this, shutter speed is definitely something that I've not mastered, I've not become really good at, but I just kind of want to use this as a way to inform you, because I know generally what shutter speed is. So shutter speed is basically being able to capture a moving object. So let's say you want to capture a really fast moving object, you're going to want to use a really high shutter speed, like 1/400th of a second, 1/7000th of a second. You're going to want a really high shutter speed in order to capture fast moving objects, and that's kind of a very simplistic definition of shutter speed. I may try to do some pictures, give some examples. If I can't, because I still haven't mastered this topic, I'll probably just put a couple examples and give credit of the image, or maybe just put some sports pictures to tell you what I'm talking about. But in very simple definition, shutter speed is being able to capture a moving object and looking like a still image. So you want a really high shutter speed, 1/400th, 1/10,000th of a second, to capture a really good moving image. And also, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard a lot of people say when you shoot a video to make it really good cinematic, you also want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate. I'll be talking about frame rate later in the video, but I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, so they usually want your shutter speed to be 48, or if you can't do, mine camera can't do 48 shutter speed, I'll do 50. So another thing to keep in mind when you're shooting these kind of videos to make it more cinematic, you always want your shutter speed to be at least double your frame rate. That's what I've heard, however, so I'll just keep that in the back of your mind. Let's go ahead and hop over to the fourth and fifth item, which is going to be talking about resolution and frame rate. Okay guys, going on to the fourth and fifth topic is talking about resolution and frame rate. I thought it'd be a pretty good idea to actually put these two together. So when you're recording a video, figuring out the frame rate to use as well as the resolution is incredibly important. Shooting in the wrong frame rate, shooting in the wrong resolution will absolutely destroy your entire video. So let's start off with frame rate. So I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, which is, I've heard by other filmmakers, is a very good frame rate to use for like these kind of videos. Makes your videos look kind of cinematic. But so what you're gonna want to do is, if you see these really cool like slow motion videos, the slow motion is really cool, but yet you record something and you put it in slow motion, it looks really crappy. It doesn't really look really cool. That's because you're shooting in the wrong frame rate. My thing can only go to 60 frames per second. You want to shoot, if you want to get good slow motion, you shoot in a high frame rate. So let's say you want to shoot a slow motion video, you're going to want to shoot at 120 frames per second, 240 frames per second, however high your camera can go, so your slow motion looks really good. So you slow it down, it looks really smooth. But if you record in 24 frames per second and try to slow it down, it looks laggy, it stutters, it doesn't look really good. So in the gist of the whole thing, frame rate, if you want to shoot in slow motion, you're going to want to shoot at a really high frame rate. If you're not going to want to shoot in slow motion, you're going to want to record it at 24 frames per second. It's a very simplistic definition of frame rate. Now, this was the fifth thing that I'm talking about. Fifth topic is resolution. Now, resolution, you have 4K, 1080, and 720. People ever tell you, ooh, what's the video and what's your TV do? If 4K is a 1080p TV, a 720 TV, whatever, you just monitor, go ahead and explain it. I'm sure people already know it. But 720 is like standard definition, 1080p is HD, 4K is 4 times better than 1080. So do the math, use some logic, 4K is the best resolution. So, depending on what you want to shoot in, the gist of this whole thing is never, ever, ever shoot a video in 720. Nobody is going to watch that. I don't even think I don't think anyone sells a 720 monitor. Gist of the story is, do not record in 720. You will ruin your video, it looks awful, nobody watches in standard definition. So, get off that rant, record in 1080. So do your research, figure out how you can do that, how you can change that in your camera. I might show picture up if you own a Panasonic G7 with the camera I own, probably go ahead and show you how to adjust all these settings on that camera. But on other cameras, I have no idea where it is. So then 4K is obviously better. My camera is a 4K camera. Not every camera can shoot in 4K. You've got to do your research and make sure that your camera is a 4K camera. If it is not a 4K camera, good luck trying to record in 4K because it is literally impossible. So just if it is 4K, I mean most displays can do 4K. Just if it is, never use 720. Only use 4K if you really want to. Using 1080p is very standard. I did a little bit of 4K videos, but mostly do 1080p videos. So just the gist of the whole thing is, record in 1080. Only record in 4K if you feel like it, or if some reason you need your video to look 4 times better than standard definition. Only Hollywood uses 4K and 8K. So that's just a very simplistic explanation of resolution. Shoot in 1080, never shoot in 720. So let's go ahead and hop over to the 6th and last tip, which is talking about mm on your camera and focal lengths. Let's go ahead and hop onto that right now. Okay guys, now we're gonna go into focal length. You see in your camera like 25 mm. I'm actually not sure. I think it's millimeters, but I'm not gonna stand firm and say that's actually what mm stands for, but I think it's millimeters. I'm not exactly sure. Not gonna go too much in depth. But basically it's your focal length. It's how far the camera can reach. So if you want, let's say let's go into more of a simplistic definition. Let's say you're standing somewhere and you want to shoot like a tree that's, I don't know, 100 feet away, like a really, really far object, but your camera is like 25 millimeters and it can't reach that. That's because you need a higher number, a higher mm. I'm just gonna call it mm. So you want like 100 or 200 mm on your lens. So you're gonna have to go ahead and do the research to figure out. So just if you want to shoot something that's far away, you're gonna want like 100 mm or 200 mm on your camera, on your lens. But if you want to shoot more close up, you're gonna want to have like a 10 mm or 14 mm to really get like a close-up shot. And also usually the lower that number is, it usually is a wide angle lens, which means more of the picture is shown, which it doesn't look like it's all like cropped up. So you can do your own research, figure out if it's a wide angle or whatever. It doesn't mean it's a wide angle, but the gist of it is, if your camera says 14 mm to like 200, that means it's good at like doing close-up shots, but it can also reach a really far distance. So if you want to shoot something that's really far away, you want to get a really high, like a 200 mm lens. And that's kind of very simplistic definition of focal length. Definitely go ahead and comment down below, does mm stand for millimeters? I'm actually not 100% sure. I'm just going to keep saying mm for right now because I honestly don't know. But as always, let's go ahead and hop over to the outro to finish off this entire video. Anyways guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you found it somewhat helpful. Hopefully you didn't find it too confusing. So basically the gist of it is, research your camera, see if it can record in 4K. If not, all cameras can record in 1080p, at least the average camera can. Also, when you're buying a lens, you want to go ahead and check the F number, which is the aperture number. Lower the aperture is, you can make your subject or the background really blurry, and you can make your subject pop. And you also want to check the mm on your camera. I'm still not sure if it's millimeters, but you want to see if it's like 14 to like 45. That means you won't be able to shoot something that's really far away. You'll only be able to shoot close up. Those are just some things you want to keep in mind when you're picking out a camera and when you're picking out a lens. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video, and as always, don't forget to go ahead and leave a like, subscribe. That definitely helps the channel out. Hopefully you guys are excited for more filmmaking tutorials. I'm gonna do a little more camera gear reviews that should be coming up in the next couple of weeks. Anyways guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always guys, I upload new videos every Sunday and Thursday at 6 p.m. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!